Hey guys, this is Chubs back again with another ACS scripting tutorial, and today we're going to be taking a look at loops. So loops basically allow you to have certain parts of your code run more than once without having to copy and paste that code over and over again. So this will be extremely valuable anytime you want something to happen a set number of times or even indefinitely. We're going to take a look at both of those scenarios here today. Before we get into the loops though, the first thing I want to do is just run you guys through this sample map that I've set up. This is a different map than the ones in the past tutorials. So in this map we have just a very basic starting room, and then you have a little passageway here that leads into a larger room, and in this larger room here against the back wall you have a teleport and you have a switch. Now this teleport is not going to actually do any teleporting. This is instead going to be like a spawn area. You can see I have a map spot here, and what's going to happen is, or what we're going to make happen is, when the player crosses into this room, a loop is going to start to run and monsters are going to start to spawn here at this map spot, and we're going to make that happen indefinitely until the player walks up and flips this switch. So this switch is pretty much going to be what stops that teleporting. So let's go ahead and pop open the script editor, and we're going to be working with a blank slate here because again this is a brand new sample map, so we're not going to be carrying over any of the other scripts or code from the last tutorials. And anytime, like going back to what I said in the first tutorial, anytime you're starting a brand new map that's going to have scripts, make sure that you put this line here at the very top, the # include, and then inside quotations zcommon.acs, and this is what gives you the different ACS functions and things like that that pretty much allow you to have your scripts do certain things. You know, without this line you're not going to really be able to do much of anything at all. So with this line at the top, we'll go down a couple lines and we will start a brand new script. So we'll just call this script 1 since we don't have any others. This will be a void script. We're not going to be passing this script any information, so no need for any parameters or arguments. And we'll go ahead and put the braces. Now before we start to actually write this script, I'll just go ahead and compile it. It should compile just fine, but before we write this script, let's actually go back to our switch here. I wanted to talk about it just for a second. So the way this logic is going to work, like I said, when the player crosses into this room, that's what is going to start this spawning. And so what we want to do is make it so that this switch stops that. So what we're going to do, we're going to make the spawning rely on a Boolean variable, and that variable is going to be controlled by this switch. So basically, as long as that Boolean variable is a certain value, as long as it's either true or false, depending on how we set it up, the spawning will just keep going on. And when you flip this switch, it's going to set the Boolean to the opposite of what it is, and that way the spawning will stop. And this will become a little more clear as we go into the script itself. So in other words, we need to go ahead and create a Boolean variable. Anytime you're dealing with a switch or something that's going to be either on or off, a Boolean variable is going to be the best option because it can only be one of two things. It can only be true or false. So that's always the ideal variable type for a situation like that. So let's go back into the script editor and let's go ahead and create a Boolean variable here at the very top, but below our include line. So it's type bool, and just to keep it really basic and easy to understand, we're just going to call this variable switch flipped. And let's say by default it's going to be false, because we're going to say that when the map starts, the switch is not flipped. Remember that flipping the switch is what's going to stop the spawning. So this script, the one that we're about to write, is going to be the script that runs when the player crosses into this room. So let's go ahead and let's compile this again. This should compile just fine. Even though this script is empty, basically as long as you have a script that doesn't have any errors or anything, it'll still compile just fine. So, you know, script 1, even though it's pretty much a blank script that does nothing, it will still compile and not give us any problems. But getting back to what I was going to say, let's go ahead and let's go to this line. This is going to be the line that the player crosses into the room. Let's go into its properties and let's give it an action of 80, which is script execute, and let's go ahead and set it to script 1 just to get this step out of the way. As far as the activation, we don't want this to be repeatable. That's not going to be necessary, but we do want the action to be when the player walks over the line. So we have that step out of the way. We don't have to worry about that anymore. Now let's get to actually writing the script itself and making it do something. So again, we created the Boolean variable. We're going to tie this directly to this switch, and we set it to false by default. So now what we want to do is when the player walks over that line and triggers this script, we want to begin a loop. And the loop that we're going to use here is called a while loop. And I'm just going to sort of write this out. I'm not going to do all of the loop just yet, but I'm going to write it out and then sort of explain to you how it works. So here's what a while loop looks like. You start with the word while, and then inside parentheses you put a condition. This is similar to a conditional statement, which you learned about in the last tutorial, like an if statement. So in this case, we're going to be tying this loop to the variable. Remember that we said this is going to be like the condition it's based on. So we're going to say while the switch is not flipped. So we will say while, we could do switch flipped equals false. That's certainly one way we could say it. We've already seen this in the last tutorial. Another way you can do it, though, a shorthand way, is you can put an exclamation symbol. Then we could do switch flipped. So this basically says while switch flipped is equal to false. That's what this exclamation symbol stands for. We could do it that way. I think I'll go ahead and just do it the long way. That way it'll be easier for you guys to read. But I thought I'd show you that exclamation thing just to teach you about that as well. So while the switch is not flipped, remember that 2 equal signs is when you're checking for whether or not something is equal, and 1 equal sign is when you're actually taking a value and assigning it to like a variable. So that's the difference. We need to go back over that again too. But while the switch is not flipped, spawn monsters. And that's just a comment. We're going to actually write the code here in just a second. So again, just a quick recap. What's going to happen here when this script is triggered, it's going to go into a loop. And what this loop does is it says while the condition inside these parentheses is true, do whatever code is here in between the loop's braces, and then when it gets to the very bottom of the code, what it's going to do is it's going to go back up to the top here, and it's going to read this condition again and check whether or not it's true. And if this condition is true, then it's going to go back and it's going to do the code again. So that's why it's called a loop. It just keeps doing that over and over until the condition is not true. Once it once all the code in the loop is done, and then it checks it. So let's go ahead and let's do the monster spawning. So I believe I have the ZDoom Wiki page here. We'll go ahead and pull it up, and we'll go under ACS functions, because this won't be an action special. Action specials is like when you want to look at something that's like a line special but in script form. So let's go to ACS functions, and I think it's under actors. Actor control should be here. Let's see. Spawn spot. There's like a whole bunch of ways to spawn things. Spawn spot facing. Thing spawn facing is that's the one I was looking for. This is the one I usually use. So thing spawn facing, and basically what this function here does is it spawns a thing. It can be a monster, it can be an item, it can be anything, and then it makes it face the same direction as the map spot that you have. And that way, when you spawn the monster, you don't have to have like a separate line of code that tells it which direction to face. This is like an all-in-one solution. For me, this has always been like the easiest way to do it. So let's go ahead and let's go back into our map editor and then the script editor, and let's type that line. So thing underscore, and you can already see it giving us some suggestions. We'll just double click this, spawn facing, and then parentheses, and then you can see it's already telling us what to type here. So thing ID, which is the first parameter it's asking for, is the thing ID of the map spot that this is going to be spawned at. And I've already gone ahead of time. If I go into thing mode here and highlight our map spot, if you look in the lower left hand corner, you can see it already has a tag of 1. I did that ahead of time, so we're going to type 1 for this because that's where we want to spawn the monster. Now type is basically the type of monster or the type of thing that you want to spawn. That's a little more complicated, so we'll go here and you can see that's it explains like what each parameter is, and that's pretty much what it says, type of thing to spawn. So what you can do is go down here, and it sort of elaborates on that, and it says the type is actually from the list of spawn numbers. You can also use T underscore something, like down here they have T underscore demon, that would spawn a pinky. So you can use either a spawn number, which is these numbers right here, or you can use the T underscore. Either one will work. I think I'm going to spawn just former humans, which are referred to as zombies or zombie men. So for these we could use either T underscore zombie for the type, or we can use the number 4. I think I'm just going to use the number, even though the type would maybe be a little bit more readable. We're just going to go with the number for now, just to show you we could do both. So let's just type 4 for that. And that just goes to show you how useful the ZDoom Wiki can be. Be sure to reference it a lot because it's going to make things much easier to understand. So the type is 4, and again this refers to the former human, comma. No fog, basically what this means is if you set it to 0 or if you type false, then that means it will spawn with teleport fog, like the green teleport fog effect. If you were to type true or 1 for this parameter, then what it would mean is that the monster or the thing would spawn, but there would be no teleport fog there. It would just kind of pop into existence. I don't want that. I want the teleport fog, so I'm going to type false for no fog because we don't want that to be true. And the last argument or parameter that it asks for is the new thing ID that we're going to give this. This is usually like if you want to give something an ID and then work with it later, like if you want to grab it with or like if you want to check for things that have a certain thing ID and or something along those lines. We're not going to do that here for this example. We're pretty much just going to want to spawn these things and then just forget about them and not manipulate them like in any other script. So for this, we're just going to type 0. We're not really going to give them any kind of an ID after they spawn. And then don't forget the semicolon. So we've already got this set up now. So when this script runs, it's going to say while this switch flip variable is equal to false, spawn a former human at the map spot with an ID of 1, and then go back up and check this condition again, and if this is still true, do it again, and it's going to keep doing it over and over. Now you might think this would already be just fine and that it would work just fine, but there is sort of a gotcha here, and we're going to learn about that right here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to compile this script. You can see it compiled without any errors. But when we run the map here and trigger this script, something's going to happen. It's not going to work just right, and we're just going to see it for ourselves. So let's go ahead and test it, and you'll see what's going on. So it might have been tough to see, but when we triggered the script, the game sort of hitched for a second, and then a message appeared in the upper left hand corner that said runaway script terminated, and only one former human spawned. So basically what happens is anytime you have a while loop that runs like indefinitely, the game pretty much expects to get some sort of a break. And if a while loop just continues over and over again, what happens is it kind of, if it were to not like self-terminate, then this loop would just happen over and over again, like at 100 miles an hour, and the game itself would sort of freeze because nothing else would have time to work. It's sort of tough to explain, but basically the short version of it is anytime you have a while loop that's happening indefinitely, you want something to slow it down at least a little bit, even if it's just a tiny bit. So it needs a delay here, and you can give it one just by simply typing delay, and then inside parentheses give it a delay in a certain amount of ticks. Now a tick is 1/35th of a second. So in other words, if you want something to delay for exactly 1 second, you can type 35. Another trick here, like if you wanted a delay for example 2 seconds, you could always just do 35 plus 35 and then type whatever that is here. But an easier way to do it is to type 35 times by using the asterisk symbol, and then however many seconds you want to delay by. So if we type 6 here, this would pretty much be a 6-second delay, because 35 ticks times 6 is about 6 seconds. So this is just a really easy way to work with it. In this case, I think what I want us to do, I'm going to go ahead and put the semicolon here as well. I think what I'm going to want us to do is have it so that there's a delay of about 3 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and just change 6 to 3, so this will be almost exactly 3 seconds. And so what will happen is first, I'm just going to change monsters to monster because we're only going to be spawning one. But what will happen is when this loop runs, it's going to spawn a former human, and then it's going to delay for about 3 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and comment that. And after that delay, it's going to go back and then it's going to check this condition again. And if this evaluates to true, then it's going to spawn the monster, wait 3 seconds, then check again. And this is going to happen pretty much constantly until the switch flip variable is not false. So now let's go ahead and run the map and let's see what happens with this new delay that we placed. So you could see that time the script or the loop continued just as it was supposed to, and we didn't get any script runaway errors or anything like that. So again, just to drive that point home, anytime you have a while loop that's going to be running indefinitely, make sure you have a delay, even if it's just a 1 tick delay. You could even do this, and remember that a tick is 1/35th of a second, so this is like an extremely short delay, but this is just enough to keep the loop going without it self-terminating. So that's a very important point, but we're going to make it 3 seconds. We're going to leave it just like that. So we've got that part out of the way. The script is working just fine. The monsters are spawning, and that's happening constantly. Now the simple part is we're just going to have a second script that's going to set the switch flip variable to true. And basically what that will do is that will stop the spawning altogether, because remember the loop depends on this condition being true. And if the switch flip variable becomes true, then switch flipped equals false. This is not going to be, this condition is no longer going to evaluate to true. So let's go ahead and let's start a brand new script. We'll just call this script 2. This will also be void. We're not going to be passing it anything, and we're just going to say switch flipped equals, and remember to use only one equal sign whenever you're assigning a certain value, true. So when this script runs, we're going to take the switch flip variable and we're just going to set it to true, and that's it. Just that simple. So let's compile, make sure. There we go, we didn't have any errors, and we've not assigned this script yet, so let's go ahead and assign it to that switch. So let's go in line mode, select the switch, the action will be 80 once again. Script number this time is going to be 2 instead of 1. This is not going to be repeatable because that's not going to be necessary for this switch either, and the action will be player presses use instead of player walks over. So now when we cross into the room, script 1 is going to happen, and then this is going to start the spawning, and that spawning will continue while the switch flip variable is false. And then when you walk up to this switch and flip it, that's going to run script 2, and script 2 is simply going to take that switch flip variable and it's going to make it true, and that's going to turn this that's pretty much going to stop this while loop, because the condition here is no longer going to be true. So let's compile this script once more, and we got no errors. And let's go ahead and run the map, and let's test both the spawning and the switch itself. So you could see the former humans kept spawning there until I went up and flipped the switch, and that stopped it. So that is pretty much while loops in a nutshell. There's really not much else to say about them. They're very handy for doing things over and over again, and you'll find many uses for them in your projects, I'm sure. So this is just one of many examples of their usefulness. Now, I did want to show you guys one last type of a loop here, and this is a loop that's a little bit tougher to read and to learn as a beginner, but it is very useful, and this is called a for loop. So what I want to do here, I'm going to make this a little different. Let's change up this example here just a little bit. I'm going to take away this switch. I'm just going to remove it altogether. So you can see we have no more switch, and what I'm going to do, instead of having the monster spawn indefinitely, I'm going to make it so that when we walk over this line here, a for loop runs, and then it's going to spawn exactly 4 former humans. Now we are still going to have the 3-second delay, but we're only going to spawn 4 of them instead of this being indefinite. So we're not going to need this second script because the switch is not going to be there, and we're not going to need this Boolean variable either. We're not going to be using any variables up here at the top at all. So let's go ahead, and we will keep the body of the loop, but you can see I deleted the while loop line. So let's make this a for loop instead. So the syntax of a for loop is the part that's kind of tricky. It's going to look really weird to you, but basically you type for and then parentheses, and then this is going to take basically like 3 arguments or 3 parameters. So the first parameter is like a variable that you place, and what programmers usually do is they name the variable just one letter. They usually start with I, which stands for index. We're not going to be using it. We're not going to be using this like an index here, but I is the one that they use, and then it's an integer variable. So type int I, and then you're going to make this equal to 0, and then type a semicolon. And this is where it's a little weird, because the each part is separated by a semicolon instead of by a comma, like when you're giving arguments. Like you can see right here, we separated these with commas. In a for loop, you're using semicolons. So again, the first part is the variable initialization, and you could put a variable in here like that you had up top, but most people when they use these for loops will just create a brand new variable here. And going back to the first tutorial, since the variable is created here in this for loop, the variable will only really exist in this for loop. So I will not be visible to any other script or outside of this loop. So you can almost think of this as just a temporary variable that's only in this loop, and it's not going to be used anywhere else or even seen anywhere else. So we've got that variable part out of the way. Next, the second part here that comes after the semicolon is a condition that you're going to check. So this is where you pretty much determine like how many times this loop runs. So what we're going to say is while I is let's see, since it starts at 0, we're going to say less than 4. I think this should do it exactly 4 times. So that's our condition. And then we're going to do one last semicolon, and then here's the last part. This is what happens when the loop finishes. So when the loop finishes, we're going to take I and we're going to increase it by 1. So we could either do I equals I plus 1, or we could do it the shorthand way by typing either I plus equals 1 or I plus plus. I think I plus plus is going to be the best one to use here because that's what most programmers do in for loops, and it's just a quick and easy shorthand way. So I plus plus is the same thing as saying take I and add 1 to it. That's all this is saying. Like if you ever have a variable and you want to decrease it by 1, I think you could do minus minus. I don't see that very often, but plus plus is the best shorthand, like for a for loop, and you'll see it used just a lot in programming in general. So I know, like I said, this probably looks really strange and confusing to you, so we're going to go back over it real quick just to sort of explain it even further and sort of maybe drive it home. So when the script runs, a for loop begins, and remember this is sort of broken up into 3 parts here. The first part of the for loop initializes a variable, and like I said too, this variable is only going to be seen inside this loop. It's not going to exist anywhere else in any other script or even anywhere else in this script. It's only going to be in this loop. The second part is the condition that's checked. So this is basically like the loop condition. So as long as I is less than 4, then this loop will run. And this is evaluated basically before the loop runs. So you know, the first thing that's going to happen is this variable is going to be created, and then the second thing that will happen is this condition is checked. So if I is less than 4, basically if 0 is less than 4, then the loop is going to happen. Next, after all of these lines of code inside the loop are finished, you go to the last part, the third part, and this is usually something that will increment the variable by 1. That's what most people will do here. So we're taking I and we're increasing it by 1. And then we're going to jump back over to the second part. Remember that the condition is what this loop relies on, and we're going to ask whether or not I is still less than 4. So, you know, if you run the loop once and you do this part, which increases I by 1, then this condition basically is 1 less than 4. That's the question that's being asked. And that, of course, is true, so it's going to run again. And then I is going to be increased, and then you're asking if 2 is less than 4. And that's true, of course, so this is going to all run again. And then, you know, it just keeps happening until I, basically until I becomes 4. And in that case, 4 is less than 4 is not true. And whenever this middle part is not true, then this loop just stops. And then if you have code down below, then, you know, once this loop stops, then all the code that comes after runs. So, like I said, a little bit more confusing because of the way it's kind of broken up into different parts, and the syntax is a little strange, but we'll go ahead and compile it, and if everything went to plan, when the script runs, it'll spawn a monster, do the delay, and this will happen 4 times because of the way that we've set up this condition here and the way that we're adding 1 to the variable after each loop pass. So let's go ahead and test the map, and let's see if it works. Alright, so it worked just right. So it spawned exactly 4 former humans, and then it stopped spawning them because I eventually became 4, and this condition was no longer true, and so the loop stopped. So that pretty much covers it, guys. That's while loops and for loops in a nutshell. Really hope this helped you all out, and I hope I explained the for loop well enough for you guys. Again, I know it's probably really confusing, especially if you've never programmed before. But for loops are extremely useful basically for any situation like where you want a loop to happen a very specific number of times. So like if we wanted to spawn 50 former humans, we could type 50 and it would run exactly that number of times. And a while loop is great for situations like if you want something to happen just indefinitely, like until something changes, or even until the map ends. I mean, you can just have something run pretty much infinitely if you want to, just as long as you have the delay that keeps it from self-terminating. But I think that covers just about everything. I don't think I had anything left to explain or to show you guys. So if you have any questions about these loops, just feel free to ask in the comments below. And this is Chubb signing out.